I, like many other people, once made an effort to try to be a hipster. Now, everyone has a different definition of hipster, and most of them are ludicrously rigid, so in the interest of not dwelling on what that definition may be, I'm going to go with this. A young to youngish urbanite who indulges obsessively in the constantly mutating counterculture of the day. They tend to be associated with thrift stores, underground music and movies, and more or less look like this. Now, when I first became aware of hipsters, I guess I made the assumption that if these guys were so keen on operating outside the norm, then maybe they were also disinterested in the typical social hierarchies and acts that people put on in normal society. Maybe it wasn't just about being cool, maybe this was a group that would accept other social rejects with open arms. That's what I thought, so I did my best to fit in. I bought some clothes and taught myself the grooming techniques of carefully executed bedragglement, and I was ready to go. This is what happened. The first thing I discovered I needed to learn how to do was to take on an attitude of complete and total boredom, to try not to show any enthusiasm for anything anywhere on earth. There is one exception to this, of course, which is that it's okay to be enthusiastic about an obscure piece of music or a movie, provided that your company has never heard of it. I always loved going to the record store, but doing so as a hipster presented a significant conundrum. Because even if you were buying a hip record, the very act of doing so was admitting to the hipster cashier that you were unhip because you didn't own that record already. More than once while I was waiting in line, I made up an elaborate story about how I was buying the record for a friend or replacing my copy that I had worn out. I would then attempt to relay this story as casually as I could to the cashier, although I don't think any of them ever really paid much attention to me. The subject of not only wearing the perfect ironic t-shirt, but telling everyone that you bought it for 75 cents at a thrift store, as opposed to admitting you bought it for 45 bucks on eBay, is well documented, so I won't go into detail about it. I had a pretty good solution to the problem, though. I made my own inkjet iron-on ironic t-shirts of these 1970s Swedish bands that I found online. My personal favorite was Garvis. I think it was one of the few hipster things that I actually did right. By the way, I encourage you to make your own Garvis t-shirt. All hipness aside, as far as I'm concerned, the more Garvis t-shirts out there, the better. I always thought it was interesting that whenever I found myself in a small town, the small-town hipsters tended to be infinitely more pretentious and condescending than big-city hipsters. I'll let you figure out why that may be. I never really liked the unspoken competition of who knew the most obscure band or piece of music, so if a hipster was blathering on about a million bands I had never heard of, I'd usually say that my favorite band was Honeyfuckles from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'd know that there was little chance that he'd ever heard of Honeyfuckles because they don't exist, I totally made them up. But almost invariably the hipster would say, "Huh, I'll have to check those guys out." It didn't seem to be a worthwhile battle, though. When I tried to get in with hipsters, admittedly I wanted to be cool, but I also wanted to be associated with a group that stood for something. Well, maybe some hipsters do stand for something, but I sure as hell couldn't figure out what it was. I eventually gave up trying to be a hipster, partially out of annoyance, partially frustration, and partially out of knowledge that I wouldn't make the cut. I know that there's a bit of that Aesop's fable, fox and the grapes thing going on there. I have to say, though, that the realization that most countercultures operate with the exact same kind of snobbery and social hierarchies as a high school cafeteria is probably one of the bigger disappointments of my time thus far on Earth. So anyway, I certainly wouldn't call myself a hipster, but for that matter, neither would anyone that I would call a hipster, because one of the key things about hipsters, of course, is that they don't like to be called hipsters. So by that logic, maybe nobody is a hipster, but by that logic again, maybe everybody is a hipster. But what the hell would I know anyway? I'm not a hipster.
And now, Mr. Yilmaz.
Next week on Tales of Mere Existence, we will carry on the miniseries Perpetual Identity Crisis with Part 3, which will be called What Do I Want to Be? Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next week.